everyone. Welcome to the Cārvāka podcast. This is your host kushalmehra. All right, today's podcast is about the book Ramayana Unravelled, and to discuss that is we have the author of the book, Ami. Ami, welcome.
Namaste, everybody. Hi, Kushal. Glad to be back. I guess almost exactly after a year.
Yes, after a year. So obviously, last time we spoke on the podcast was about your book Mahabharata Unravelled. Now we are talking about Ramayana. So मतलब was this part of the plan कि पहले तूने रामायण करनी थी, मतलब महाभारत करनी थी, फिर रामायण पे फोकस करना था, मतलब षड्यंत्र रचे जा रहे हैं तुम्हारे एंड से?
यार महाभारत का भी प्लान नहीं था, रामायण का भी ऐसा कुछ सोच के नहीं करा था. बट आई थिंक वंस महाभारत गॉट रिटन एंड द फीडबैक दैट आई गॉट, सो वी वर स्टडिंग रामायण जैसे तू भी तेरा करता था ना. यू डू योर रामायण रीडिंग, आई वाज आल्सो डूइंग एज यू डू, राइट? वी वर डूइंग प्रीटी मच इन पैरेलल. So after Mahabharat, and given that people really appreciated the kind of information that the book had, it just seemed like the next step. And yeah, I was personally very fascinated as I studied the Ramayana. So I thought it was important to bring out the aspects from Valmiki Ramayana for people
So
like
maybe
us.
we can start with this theme. So obviously you have covered the two Itihasas now as an author. Now let's first start today's discussion with the breakdown of what it means when we use the word Itihasa in our context. Now I'll tell you why. Because मैं अभी नॉर्थ अमेरिका में बैठा हूँ, यहाँ पे मैंने खुद अभी जितना मैंने अब मैं लाइब्रेरीज भी दो एक का दुक्का ही गया हूँ, मैं अभी तक ज़्यादा जा नहीं पाया हूँ. बीन ऑन द रोड मोस्ट ऑफ द टाइम, इसके लिए थोड़ी दिक्कत हो रही है. बट नाउ आई हैव सम स्पेयर टाइम, तो आई इंटेंड टू गेट इनटू लाइब्रेरीज, चेक आउट अ फ्यू बुक्स ऑन इंडोलॉजी. बेसिकली मेरे को इंडोलॉजी की किताबें करनी है और कुछ नहीं, बाकी तो किताबें मिल जाती हैं. नाउ लेट्स स्टार्ट विद दिस अंडरस्टैंडिंग ऑफ हाउ narration of events happens in different cultures. Now there is a classical anglicized way of narrating events, and then there has been our way of narrating events, how they happened. And this is where what is history, what is mythology, what is fact, what is fiction, and what is true and what is an exaggeration becomes an extremely confusing way of looking at the world when it comes to our culture and our scriptures and our understanding of reality. So where do you stand on this whole itihas? What is itihasa subject? Because I know you touch upon it in the book, iske liye maine isse start kiya.
Huh. Um, so I go with the definition given in the Shastras of on Itihas, right? So the way we look at Itihas is Dharma, Artha, Kama, Mokshanam, Upadesham, Samanvitam, Purva Vruttam, Katha Yuktam, Itihasam, Prachakshate. Purva Vruttam, something that has happened in the past. Katha Yuktam, it has elements of allegory. It is told in a Katha format. Also, because a lot of our Itihas, Mahabharat, Ramayana times, it was oral tradition, so to say, right? So it had to be in a form which was easier to propagate. So definitely there is an element of katha, of allegory in it, and it had to convey a message of what, how do you live your life. So in a way, I look at the way Indian Itihas is written is like a case study of the Gnan, which is anyways conveyed through us in many different Shastras, be it the Shruti or the Smriti literature. So however, the Purva Vruttam part also matters, which means there is definitely an event that happened in the past. It is not meant just on imagination of some person. It is based on an event that has happened, but communicated to us in a way that is in the katha format, in the story format. So that is how I understand Itihas, and that is how I think how our Itihas, especially Mahabharata, Ramayana, are written. So we have only two granthas which are clearly categorized as Itihas. Later on, there is this whole tradition of Akhyayika, yeah, which is also sort of considered Itihas, but it is in the literature, which are written about, which are stories about kings and kingdoms and all of that. They also have an historical element, but they also have an aspect of Katha, even in those.
So would itihasa in that case be like a creation of a story? I'm trying to understand, because there's no clearly equivalent word in English, but there are lines in English that can be used to explain this. Like, you know how in a movie sometimes they say this feature film is based on true events. You know how they say, like, these events happened this is not the exact narration of how they happened. We have added elements that may be far away from the reality, and we have exaggerated the reality because of multiple reasons. One could be the format we choose to write it in, and clearly the format over here is poetry, because these are
Kavya.
poet yeah, they
Kavya.
are poetic forms of explaining what has happened in the past. Two is that we have to make it digestible to the reader or the consumer of the content itself. So we sometimes take the liberty of extending what the reality might be, which is one of the reasons that in the case of the Ramayana, as you know, there are multiple versions of the Ramayana, multiple versions that differ exceedingly with each other. Like you can't have one version compared to the like even on a simpler way. One of the things that you point in the book is the difference between the Ramcharitmanas and the Valmiki Ramayana, and you actually narrate the story of the Ramcharitmanas and the Valmiki Ramayana, and how certain stories in the Ramcharitmanas and in the Valmiki Ramayana vary with each other. So would that be a better understanding of when we as Indians, we as Hindus, try to explain what Itihasa is to the other audience?
So I would, I agree with you largely, though I would say that it is important to differentiate between retellings and what we understand as the itihas per se. Yeah. So Ramcharitmanas, Kamba Ramayana, Adhyatma Ramayana, all of that I consider as retellings of some version of the story of Ram that existed, which comes to us from Valmiki Ramayana. So, even amongst all these, to me, primary text to understand Itihas would be a manuscript of Valmiki Ramayana. Yeah, that is what I would definitely go back to. Now, within Valmiki Ramayana, are there elements of exaggeration? Are there elements which are metaphorical? Yes, even in that, I would say so. So, if say Ramcharitmanas has an incident and Valmiki Ramayana has an incident, and if they vary, I would go with Valmiki Ramayana incident as the truer version per se. But within Valmiki Ramayana, there could be elements which are metaphorical as well as exaggerated exactly for what we discussed to propagate it well, to make people understand that story properly and make it easily consumable.
Yeah, but even in the case of the Valmiki Ramayana, all these things equally matter, right? We don't even have to compare Valmiki Ramayana with the other, say, 200 plus versions of the Ramayana that exist in the marketplace of ideas. Even inside the Valmiki Ramayana, the pattern of narration of events is used in this exact format, right? It is a poetic form, it is used in a storytelling
Correct.
format,
Right.
and it has a lot of exaggerations from what if I was to take the Ramayana literally, then then I would run into many problems, because then I can't prove many things.
But you know, even when you read the Ramayana, at least that's what my experience was, that a lot of incidents which are otherwise considered to be metaphorical are actually not metaphorical in the Ramayana per se, right? Let's take an example of the building of the Nala Setu. Okay, now Nala Setu, the typical understanding we have with the story which we hear is राम जी के नाम के पत्थर लिए और पानी पे छोड़ दिए और वो तैरने लगे. This is what we typically are known. This is what we typically know. Now, in Valmiki Ramayana, that is not the case. In Valmiki Ramayana, they actually talk about how these guys built a setu using huge trees, using barks of trees, using boulders, using mountains. Now, the question could be, oh, but how are they so strong that mountains उठा के फेंक दिए? There I think maybe there is an exaggeration over there, but the construction per se is of a setu, how a setu would have been constructed. Yeah, so that itself is different from what we understand. Take the example of the Lakshman Rekha. There is no mention of such a Lakshman Rekha in Valmiki Ramayana. Valmiki, and even otherwise, I think of Lakshman Rekha more as a figurative speech where Sita actually crosses the limit of how she spoke to Lakshman in that incident, probably out of anger, out of concern for whatever reason. So the way Lakshman Rekha has eventually been portrayed in later retellings is more figurative. It is not a real Lakshman Rekha, which we don't find in Valmiki Ramayana. So in that sense, I find Valmiki Ramayana to be a lot more real than the other retellings that we come across.
Yeah, see, as
More
far as
believable.
my version on the Setu is different, and I've mentioned this on my Patreon sessions also. Right, there are natural phenomenon that can clearly explain what has happened in that structure over there that
Yeah.
lies underwater right now. We don't need any story to explain that. This is my view, and people can disagree with me. You can explain that with natural phenomenon. Now, now this also I think we need to discuss a lot of times. What today we have in the popular culture is obviously, the 1980s Ramayana series by Ramanand, Sagar, and that has captured the popular imagination of the country, and a lot of stories in that this version Ramanand Sagar used was more from the Ramcharitmanas and a few other versions than actually from the Valmiki Ramayana. And what has happened is even in the case of a mindset of many Hindus, they actually do consider those things to be the truth in the Valmiki Ramayana. Now, what was your reaction when, in your sessions, when you actually tell people that, Lakshman Rekha, there is no such thing as the Lakshman Rekha story, literally, in the Valmiki Ramayana? So, what are the reactions of these people? Like in my case, I'll tell you, the people were shocked that Lakshman Rekha was not real.
I think I'll tell you an incident. So we were discussing वो युद्ध कांड सब चल रहा था,
Uh-huh.
and everybody was like, अरे अभी तक वो कहीं भी गदा नहीं आई हनुमान जी की, and I was like, actually there is no गदा हनुमान जी की इसमें, है ना? That imagery itself is a later day addition, and there is this very sweet guy who joins our session, and he's like, मेरा तो पूरा जीवन व्यर्थ हो गया. Are you telling me हनुमान जी doesn't hold a गदा? And it does. I mean, ये हमारे लिए इतने वी आर अटैच्ड टू दैट इमेज, राइट? आज भी हम हनुमान जी को गदा के बिना नहीं देख सकते, एंड ओरिजिनल पोर्ट्रेयल में देयर इज नो गदा. So yeah, it does come as a shock to a lot of people, and also I think some of these things don't really matter. ठीक है, चलो, if you think he has a gada or doesn't have a gada, big deal, it doesn't change so much, so people can still continue to believe what they do, but yeah, it does come as a shock.
Okay, now let me try the. I don't know. I'm just giving you this argument, although I am on your side. Why should we consider the Valmiki Ramayana the primary text?
Because so there are two three things here, right? When we say there are multiple versions of Valmiki Ramayana, all the versions eventually go back to Rishi Valmiki. So they start off with Vandan to Rishi Valmiki. We can see that in Ramcharitmanas as well, right? They all eventually talk about Valmiki, and so it is very clear that all those versions are based off Valmiki Ramayana. That is one. Second, even in the categorization that we have, what is called as Itihas is actually Valmiki Ramayana. So going by that, and of course, yeah, so by this I go back to Valmiki Ramayana as a key version. There is no Ramayana before that.
So basically, and what is the importance of a primary text in your view, as an author now who has written two fantastic summaries of epics in India? Why is it important to consider the primary text? What is so unique about the primary text? As in, I mean, why not write a summary based on the Ramcharitmanas? If I was to
I
play
mean,
that.
we can write based on Ramcharitmanas. I have no problems with people doing that. However, I think there are two three things, right? Um, Itihas for us, as we were just discussing, it is not just pure documentation of facts. It is more than that. It is supposed to convey a certain message, a certain approach to living lives. Like it is an upadesh for dharma, artha, kama, moksha, the purushartha. People have been learning from these texts, learning the way of living life, learning a way of managing their dharma sankats, of understanding what ethical dilemmas even are, and understanding what dharma is. So, if we want to take the right lessons from the text, it is important to know the story as it is and not just based on somebody's imagination. That is one factor in my mind. The second factor is more, I would say, political in nature, and that is today a lot of narrative building happens around our past. Right? There are stories of our past told to us, and that is sort of imposed on us as an identity. कि अरे आप लोग तो ऐसे ही हो. आप लोग तो जातिवादी थे, आप लोग तो मिसोजाइनिस्ट ही थे, ठीक है. अब I'm not saying we have to defend anything, but we at least have to know what the truth was. Was it really that? Let us go back and figure out. And in many cases, it does turn out that what has been told to us is actually not the case, right? And I find it very interesting. On one end, our history or itihas is sort of junked as mythology. अगर कुछ अच्छा है तो it is junked as mythology. अगर कुछ बुरा है जिससे narrative building हो सकता है, then we go back and take those examples as well. So my point is very simple. We need to start owning our narrative, and the owning of the narrative can only happen when we go back to the primary text per se, which is used for setting the agenda and propaganda.
Yeah, it could be that. Also, I have never understood this particular trend that because you mentioned misogyny and caste in this, so I'll work on that. There is no culture on planet Earth which was not misogynistic, or if you don't want to use the word caste, or did not have hierarchical structures, which were and look, hierarchies are a byproduct of agriculture. All societies post agriculture had societies, had hierarchies. Whether it's the Greek Plato's Republic that talks about a three-tier system, whereas the Christian cultures that also have this, the British society and its robust class system that they couch it better. I mean, they called it class. Every culture has hierarchies. What we should be debating about as humanists and human beings is how fluid are those hierarchies, and at different points of time different cultures had different fluidity levels in these hierarchies, and definitely India messed up at that. As far as the misogyny angle is concerned, look, I have been very clear. This has been my view on social media. I have said it again and again. All religions in varying degrees give women a raw deal. I say this again on this discussion with full responsibility, and nobody has to disagree with me. As someone who has been a humble student of religion for the last 15 years, in fact, my biggest question to every woman is, why are you a believer? I always ask this to women. I mean, you know me for 10 years. मैं तुझे 10 साल से ये question पूछ रहा हूँ.
So, and we have discussed this often, Kushal, right? So, my take is this on this issue, right? So caste का तो तूने बोल दिया. I fully agree. Forget caste, right? आज भी आप देखो, don't we have a hierarchy in terms of elites who think that they have the only right to free speech? So when
Mhm,
democracy is great, but when the results of the democracy are against them, they want to ban democracy. They want to ban certain people from voting, right? So
mhm.
ये hierarchy तो power struggle तो हर जगह होता ही है, and इतने सालों से रहा है. And in some way we had that Viva and the Varna structure, the idea of which was hierarchy in some way, but it also was to ensure that all types of people get some kind of ajivika, right? Everybody should have the kind of income that they want. The issue becomes when one group starts oppressing the other group and stops their growth opportunities. Also, what happens is some of this is more organic as well, because technology also goes up and down. Uske saath saath bhi changes hota hai. So as you very rightly said, was there fluidity or was there not fluidity? That is one. But the second is also some incidents which are conveyed to us in a manner that there was some kind of oppression, and hence you were always like that. But when you go back to the text, there was nothing like that, right? That is also another angle to it. When it comes to misogyny, I actually differ with you slightly, because the way I see this, right? Were there stricter norms about the role of a woman in the society versus what there is today? Definitely there was, right? No doubts about it. But then the same kind of uh, restrictions, if I may, were on men as well, were on a large part of the society. The whole rights movements that we see now was not there, not even for men, forget women or anybody, right? So I don't think we should. So in today's context, they will all look like misogyny, so to say. But I would say we need to differentiate there also. There might be some statements made which look like misogyny, but did it boil down to hating women? I don't think so. Did it boil down to women not having a say in their life? I don't think so. Did women not make decisions of their life? I don't think so, right? Because as far as I have seen and studied the women in Ramayana, let's take Ramayana per se, right? Ram's life has been shaped by the women in his life, right from Kekai to Shurpanakha to Sita to everybody. He has been one person who has actually, well, has, I won't say face the consequences, but at every point in time he has not really displayed misogyny, so to say. He has taken the decisions that have come his way through the women in his life. Would I call it misogyny? I wouldn't, right? There are certain decisions a person has to take because of his position, which we can discuss in detail, but I don't think of them as misogyny, so to say. Misogyny would mean consistent behavior which is against the benefit of women. Is that displayed in every action? No. I would actually, so hence I would actually not agree with you on the misogyny part, especially in Mahabharata Ramayana. Not
I,
to say that there were no issues with women at any point in time, ऐसा सब नहीं था, ठीक है, but the whole framework about rights was not existent then. So the restrictions which women had, other men also had, right? The roles which elder brother played, so to say, were, he had to live within a framework of what was expected out of him. It was more a kartavya duty based society, as we were also discussing yesterday, right? So that will in itself impose certain restrictions which the society lived with, and hence just to take women aside and say misogyny, I don't completely agree with that view.
Yeah, but it's the men who wrote the rules. Even those rules were not written by women. If you look at a statistical analysis of who wrote the rules, most of these formulations, it was not like the women were part of the rule making process. Let's just be crystal clear about that. And it's not
Um,
unique to India. I'm
it
not
is
saying
not
it's unique to
India.
India. It's just the theory of the world. It's the rule of the
Kushal,
world.
it is also to do with evolution and biology, right?
Ah,
We were, and
I
also
don't agree with
technology
that.
to that
That's
matter.
a
Technology,
naturalistic
for
fallacy.
some,
That's a naturalistic fallacy. That is always people put it down on biology. I don't agree with that. If it is all biology, why are why are women fighting about against it today? Then, if there
because
was
we
no
are, we
problem,
have access to technology which did not exist then. Also with time, maybe actually the oppression increased, which was not the case then, right? There were clear rules: women did this job, men did this job, women had this right, men had that right. Also today in a lot of rural societies, while it does look like, oh, women are oppressed, you see that they end up taking so many more decisions in the house. They might be wearing that ghungat, right? I have seen that in parts of Gujarat as well. So would I call those women not empowered? I don't think so.
well,
So I think
not
we have to be
empowered is also doesn't mean that they are empowered. Let's just be very honest there.
correct
There are
within the
degrees of empowerment also. Like I said, the different religions have given women a raw deal in differing degrees also. So maybe the degree in which women were given a raw deal, and in different contexts also, in different areas also. Like let's take inheritance for example. And in inheritance there is no one standard inheritance take in Hinduism. For example, I mean, there
yeah.
is a wonderful paper that I have recommended to my patrons when the entire discussion of the Hindu code bill was happening. So this entire trope being sold that the Hindu code bill was just shoved on Hindus without any discussion from any section of the society is just bollocks. There is a
Yes.
clear cut history of people going back and forth, the government reaching out. A government of that time started under British India, going back and forth. And you know what the fascinating aspect is? Even within the Smriti text, different Smriti texts had different versions on inheritance also. So at the end of the day, they
Yes.
got confused. And the paper is beautiful. It is such a wonderful collection of all the debates that happened. My point being is, for example, Islam gives a far worse deal. I'm just stating it out. When it comes to inheritance to women, far worse deal than any Hindu law would. Even ancient, I'm talking about ancient law to ancient law comparison. I'm not talking about the modern Indian constitution giving Hindu women equal
Yeah.
rights. But
Yeah.
even on inheritance, that the Hindu code bill and then the subsequent Supreme Court judgment, I think it was in 2008, don't quote me on it, led to Hindu women reaching equal rights, is itself a deviation from the past. So, per se, de facto, the women were not getting an equal share there. Now I accept your point where in some places in the house, Hindu women, it is very interesting, have a far greater say than the Hindu men do, and that point I accept. But that is not unique to Hindus either. That applies to different cultures in different contexts in the same way. So Hindus are not unique in that sense, is what I'm trying to say. In fact, my point is on the both sides. Hindu not unique. When people try to put this caste, cows and curry, you know, stereotype about Hindus across the world, and then Hindus are not special when they find something unique, which is good also. You can find these examples across different cultures, and if you study anthropology, I know it is now somebody will say anthropology is a Western construct. Well, the internet is also a Western construct. Maybe you need to get off that also then. If you hate Western constructs so much, I mean, that's my point. You didn't come up with the internet. Unfortunately, some Gora did. Unfortunately for you. Sad life, hashtag.
Unless you say that Indrajal was actually internet.
Oh yeah, I mean, yeah, just yeah. I mean, it is, yeah, it is what it is. But you know
Yeah,
what I loved about your book, and I don't want to spend much time on this misogyny bit because it's quite clear we disagree, and we've disagreed on this for a decade. But yeah, but this part I found very interesting in your book. You say both Rama and Krishna strove to establish and live by dharma. They did what was needed to ensure adharma was destroyed and dharma prevailed by setting the right examples for the sustenance of the society. Their personalities were different, but not their value systems, and least of all, their understanding of dharma. Explain this.
so I'll tell you where this is coming from. Generally, an understanding that, or generally, what we understand is that
Oops. Let's just wait. She'll be back. Yeah, you're back, Ami. You're back. You're back. You're back.
हाँ, तो मैं कह रही थी कि जनरल जो कई बार कहा जाता है कि कृष्ण जो जी वो तो छली कपटी थे और वो तो अपना एंड के लिए टू गेट टू द एंड ही वुड कॉम्प्रोमाइज ऑन एवरी काइंड ऑफ मीन्स वेरएज
Mm-hmm.
राम जो थे वो कैसे थे वो मर्यादा पुरुषोत्तम ही almost bordering towards being stubborn that he would do only the means mattered and not so much the end because he was the Maryada Purushottam. This is
Mm-hmm.
the general image that is drawn for both, right? And I believe that both of them are, these images are very unfair to both of them because actually they were not, it was not as if Krishna was always only Chali Kapti, right? Even for the Yuddha, he tried his best till the end to negotiate and say, "Chhi, bhalo, पांच गांव ही दे दो, let the war as far as possible, we can avoid it." Of course, it didn't get avoided, and then you have to do what you need to do to win. That's one aspect. Similarly, Ram also, if you see his life, he's not that stubborn kind of a person who just is like नहीं नहीं यही तरीका है and this is the rule book and I'll live by the rule book. ऐसा नहीं है. He also was very clear at what point what mattered and he did that. And we see that in different points in their life as well. So what mattered is setting the right precedence, and when I say right precedence I mean it in that context, right? Because one thing which I really like both about Mahabharata Ramayana, even when they explain situations, when they explain dharma and when they explain personalities, one word uses desh kalavit. So understanding the nuances of time place that situation is happening in, so I'm saying right from that perspective, right? So setting the right precedence which was needed to ensure that the samaj at that point continued to sustain, grow and thrive as much as possible. That end goal was similar for both of them, where you put your foot down and say ki nahi, beyond a point you cannot allow bullies to bully the innocents, or to just because you have power you, or just because you are vocal enough doesn't mean you will always have your way. ये नहीं चल सकता. At some point you have to put your foot down and set set whatever is the ensure there is a social construct and it doesn't become a matsya nai kind of a situation where badi machli chote machli ko kha jati hai. So that's what I wanted to convey through this, that the end goal was actually similar for both of them. And even maybe personality wise, Ram actually was a lot more expressive and effusive than Krishna was. The understanding is usually the other way around. ऐसे लगता है कि राम तो एकदम एकदम इमोशंस भी नहीं दिखाते होंगे, whereas Krishna is this leela and always happy and expressive. Actually it's the other way around. Krishna is more yogastha, calm. Even when his family died, he is calm, not reacting. Whereas Ram, at every point in life, you see profusely showing emotion, right? Especially this whole situation when Sita was kidnapped, and his emotions came out at every single point in time. His love came out during the 30 years of Vanvas, the romantic side of Ram. The pain of his came out when Sita was kidnapped. Even at times during the Vanvas, when his regret for what his father did, right? That also comes out. It's interesting. People think that अरे नहीं उन्होंने तो सब मान लिया. उन्होंने मान लिया. He did what he thought was the right thing to do at that point, but does not mean that he did not understand where that decision making of his father and his stepmother were coming from, and that did hurt him. He also showed that hurt to Lakshman once in a while, right? So Ram is actually a lot more expressive and effusive than even Krishna is. But the end goal was still the same. And if it meant that means needed to be compromised in that very strict black and white sense, both of them did that as well.
Yeah, I mean, if the classic case of means needed to be compromised would be what Shri Ram did to help Sugriva, right?
Exactly.
Right? I mean, I think that would be the case. But also, when people do this comparative analysis of Shri Ram and Shri Krishna, I just think it's an unfair analysis because of the sheer reason of the difference in the years between the two itihasas. Now, the moral arc, in my view, keeps expanding and changing as per the changes that are happening actively in your society. First
Correct.
of all, what is the geographical surrounding where the Ramayana was written? What is the geographical surrounding where, let's say, the Mahabharata, or for that matter, even the Bhagavad Gita was written? I'm not saying they are drastically different. I'm just saying these are multiple variables that need to be considered. Human beings change in a matter of 200 years. Give you an context. I am in North America. In the year 1960, there were Jim Crow laws that actively promoted segregation, right? This is
Yeah.
not even 60 years ago. In a matter of 60 years, this society has come from here to here. Now we are talking about the moral compass and the way of looking at things and handling things between the Ramayana and the Mahabharata that have a gap of so much more. And then we say that, oh, in here this is this, here is that. Now if you're just doing a comparative analysis for trying to understand both the ethics and maybe pick version X from here, version Y from there, and become a better human being, that I understand. But if your comparative analysis is some sort of a gotcha moment for Rama, I think you need therapy. That's what I would say to that person. Because you just in 1960s, like, again, use the example of America. Lenny Bruce, a stand-up comic, was arrested under less free speech norms that America had at that time. George Carlin was arrested in the United States of America. This is the country that had the First Amendment since the day its constitution was made. The First Amendment on paper and the First Amendment in working did not happen for the first few hundred years of the American Constitution either. The actual culture of absolute free speech in America only started with stand up comics pushing the boundaries. Why I'm using this as a contemporary example is this, that to even try and compare and then present it as some sort of a gotcha moment, I think is intellectually dishonest. The people were in completely
A very
different eras.
simplistic comparison. It's a very simplistic comparison. And I think even when you do compare, right, the conclusions which people come to is usually not based on even the study of the text. It is based on kahi suni baatein. That is my bigger concern. कि कहीं सनी बातों के इस पर हम राम ऐसे कृष्ण ऐसे कह देते हैं एंड वी फील वेरी हैप्पी अबाउट इट कि हाँ हाँ चलो एंड देन वी जस्टिफाई ऑल्सो राइट वी विल हैव वेरियस थियोरीज अराउंड अच्छा ऐसे हो गया अब इवोल्यूशन ऐसे हो गया एंड अब राम से कृष्ण ऐसे हो गए वगैरह वगैरह सो आई थिंक इट्स वेरी सिंपलिस्टिक इफ यू रियली इवन वांट टू लर्न फ्रॉम देयर लाइव्स इट्स इंपॉर्टेंट टू नो देयर लाइव्स फॉर व्हाट दे वर रादर देन बीइंग इंटेलेक्चुअली लेजी अबाउट just putting an adjective to them.
And even if I was to take the literal left wing version that these are nothing but stories and they are completely, mythologies that were written round about the same time, I'll tell you why they are long. Anybody who has understood linguistics will look at the Ramayana and look at the Mahabharata and understand the linguistic subtle differences. Anybody who has understood basic linguistics, I mean, I don't expect it from dumb left fingers, but still, I'm going to try and explain them this basic thing. Linguistics matter. Language changes. For example, in the Rig Veda, there is something called the family books, and then there are something called the new books. There are old books, there are new books. You know why they are called old books and new books? Because they literally have a different language. The language itself changes. In fact, the old books language is very much closer to what you see in the Atharva Veda or latter Sanskrit. But the early language is very different. That's how you know. Now, inside the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, also you will see subtle changes if you read both, and you'll understand that if you break the root down at times. I'm not saying it is very drastic, because Sanskrit by then was a very developed language at that time.
Exactly.
Three, these were written. Now, I'm willing to accept one thing, that all these books were written much later and collated. That is something I'm willing to accept.
Like
Much
written,
later,
written. Huh.
written much later in a much more developed language format. And there might be even more interpolations coming later on in terms of verses, which is, in fact, Shrikant Talagiri says this a lot of time, that you have to look at certain verses in the Ramayana which talk about certain things that simply are not found archaeologically in that era at that time. So how you assume these are interpolations is that these come later on. So these are unfair comparisons that people do. And I mean, I don't know why people do it, but they do. Now, another thing that I found very interesting, that you have said in one of the questions that you raised in your introduction, is that was Lakshmana an angry man as he is thought to be usually, or is there more depth to his character? Now my question is that for both people, right? People who claim Lakshmana is an angry man, and for people who claim Lakshmana is not an angry man. Now, what is the methodology that anybody would come up when it comes to basically, coming up to the conclusion that Lakshmana is or is not an angry man?
Yeah, okay. So I want to state this upfront. I'm not saying that he is never angry. Yeah, he's always stoic. No, that's not what I'm saying. One, there are areas where he has shown anger, sometimes even unjustified. And there are areas where he has been this pillar for Ram, extremely stoic, managing him, controlling him when need be. This comparison is actually coming from what is a general understanding, because it is, if you see certain places in, say, Ramcharitmanas or even other retellings, a lot of areas where Lakshman is shown to get extremely angry, baat baat pe gussa ho jate hain. In Valmiki Ramayana, some of those incidents are actually Ram getting angry. Yeah, especially around जो वरुण देव पर जब गुस्सा होते हैं, the story around how uh, when Varun Dev was not letting them cross to Lanka. In one version, usually they say Lakshman ne gussa kar diya and Ram stopped him. Whereas actually in uh, Valmiki Ramayana, it is the other way around. It is Ram getting angry and Lakshman controlling him. When they couldn't find Sita, Ram was the one to say that Sacharacharam Vinashyami, I will destroy everything. And Lakshman is like, Arey, your anger is not at the right person. I mean, you are trying to destroy the world, but actually the world hasn't done to you anything. Let's calm down, let's relax, and let's focus our energies on finding Sita, right? So there have been this instances as well. However, in the first part of Ramayana, when Shri Ram is asked to go for Vanvas, of course it is actually Lakshman who's very, very angry. And he actually says that our Pita, he's become kami under the influence of just Kama Vasana. He's taking this decision which he shouldn't be taking. So badhyatam va, either kill him or arrest him. This is also what Lakshman is saying. So there are times when he's very, very angry. But then when Ram was in that emotionally susceptible position where the vulnerable position where he needed support and emotional backing, Lakshman was the one who stood by him at every point. So, according to me, Lakshman actually has an extremely high emotional quotient, to talk of it in today's terms. Rather than call him always angry young man or not angry young man. I don't think that angry young man justifies his character, so to say, but that doesn't mean he never got angry. I What I meant to say is he's actually a lot more emotionally mature than his usual portrayal on in mainstream understanding.
I don't know. Understanding the character of Lakshman or Lakshmana, however you want to pronounce it. South Indians might say Lakshmana, North Indians might say Lakshman. So have at it, North Indians and South Indians. Um, is like looking at my Twitter handle and trying to understand me as a person, right? Now, I can only understand what I see. Now, if you want to do an ideal analysis, is you look at all the things that are uttered in the Ramayana from Lakshman, you do an analysis, you create 10, 20, 30 categories based on emotional standards: angry, miffed, etc., 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 happy, ecstatic, sad, mildly sad, and then you study them and you put there, and then maybe you can form that. I mean, if you want to. um, my reading of the Ramayana definitely has been that he is, the right word, you have used the right word, he is a very emotional person, and he does not hide his emotions, and sometimes the emotions that come off do tend to come off as extreme anger, but the emotions also come off as extreme love. The love also is extreme then. The love, I mean, like his love for his brother, his love for his brother is mind boggling, to say the least.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So
So
to
for me,
me, that is
yeah.
important.
No, actually, I see a change in Lakshman's personality over. I mean, I won't say change, right? But at least the way he has handled. He is definitely more livid initially when Ram is asked to go for Vanvas. Even after that, when Sumatra actually left them at Shringwerpur and left and went, and he asked everybody, "Acha, what is the message you want to take back?" Lakshman was like, my father, I don't even consider him my father. So all that वो तभी भी बोलते हैं. पर उसके बाद when Ram is in that position where Ram is like, "अरे, I feel really upset. I don't know if Bharat and Kaikeyi are going to take care of Kaushalya. उनका क्या होगा? I hope उनके pressure के कारण Dashrath doesn't lose his life वगैरह वगैरह." Of course, this episode, some people explain it saying that no, Ram was only testing Lakshman. That's a different thing. But some commentators say that. But anyways, in Valmiki Ramayana, it comes very clearly that he tells Lakshman कि तुम वापस चले जाओ because we don't know what Bharat and Kaikeyi would do to our mother and father. And at that point, when Ram is in that position, Lakshman does not lose his anger. जो अब तक he was losing, right? And in this situation, he's like, no, no, you don't worry, it's going to be all fine. We are here with you. I will not leave you and go. And that is the theme you see going forward. Of course, when then Bharat comes, and again Lakshman thinks Bharat to humko marne aa raha hai, and he becomes angry. But again, he cools down very fast when Ram explains and Bharat comes and talks. But after that, right, whenever Ram needed him to stand up, without even saying that, he did. So yes, he is emotional, but I also see his emotional maturity develop over time in the different as we go ahead in Ramayana.
Hmm. Now, another thing that you touch upon in the book is Ravana. I think we can't have a discussion of Ramayana without Ravan. Ravan के बिना रामायण पूरी नहीं होती. After all, key character है. So, so you again mentioned this. What led to the downfall of Ravan? Did he refrain from forcing himself on Sita because he cared for her consent? Did he abduct Sita to avenge his sister? So, what is your view?
So when Ravan dies, Mandodari makes a very interesting statement. She says, "You ruled the world when you controlled your senses. But I think these senses that you controlled eventually took their revenge out on you and started controlling you. And when you gave in to them, your downfall began." This is what Mandodari says after Ravan has died. Okay. And this, I think, pretty much explains Ravan's character. He had become one extremely ahankari after he got that ye ki bhai koi use maar nahi sakta. He became extremely ahankari and he became extremely lustful. Sita was not the first lady he kidnapped. There were many who he had either kidnapped or violated before Sita. He was not waiting for anybody's consent, so to say. Even the kidnapping of Sita, people tend to say कि अच्छा अपनी बहन का बदला लेने के लिए, बहन की रिस्पेक्ट के लिए उसने ऐसा करा. That to me, that I actually don't buy at all, and there is a reason for that, because the बहन herself, Shurpadakha, when this whole incident happens and her nose and ears are cut, why? Because she tried to kill Sita. Initially, she goes, approaches them, tells Ram, marry me. Ram does some joke and he says, nahi, nahi, I have a wife, you marry my brother. And Lakshmana is like, no, but I am his das, so I can't marry you. So you better go back to Ram. And she thinks that these guys are making fun of me because of the woman over there. And she tries to kill Sita, she attacks Sita, and that's when Ram says, no, no, now you need to punish her. This is not done. That's when the nose and ears are cut. Now, she could have gone back. Of course, she first goes back to Khar and Dushan and says that you take revenge. So that's when 14,000 Rakshasas, they attack Ram, and Ram single-handedly kills all of them. That's when Shurpanakha goes to Ravan. When she goes to Ravan, that scene itself is very interesting. Ravan has no clue that 14,000 of his men have actually been killed in Janasthan. He is happy, he is reveling in his pleasure. And Shurpanakha then tells him that what are you doing? राजा होने के नाते आपका क्या कर्तव्य है? आपको ये भी नहीं मालूम आपके राज्य में चल क्या रहा है? And then to get Ravan to actually go and take Sita, she lies to him. She knows his weak spot. She knows Ravan is extremely lustful, and once the lust takes over, he has no control over what he does. Vivek buddhi सारी चली जाती है. So she tells him that you see this halat of mine, मेरे नाक और कान जो काटे हैं वो किस क्यों काटा? Because there is this extremely beautiful wife of Ram who is like a mani. Whoever she touches, whoever she hugs is like a devta. That is the luck of that man. And she goes on to explain every feature of Sita. And she says, I was actually going to get Sita for you. Because she is Tavarupa Bharya. She's a and was with her like who is this lady? Yeah, his body is in pain. He now wants her, and that's when he goes and kidnaps. That whole thing happens. He goes to Maricha and gets his help to kidnap Sita. So it was not out of some respect for his sister. It was not out of some kartavya bodha. No, it was pure and pure out of lust to say, wow, now I need this woman. How dare somebody stop my sister from getting her for me? Yeah. So that's one aspect. The other aspect of waiting for Sita's consent. He waited for Sita's consent because he was afraid that this time, because इसके पहले बहुत स्त्रियों ने उसको श्राप दिया था. किसी किसी ने ब्रह्मा जी को जाके कहा था कि पुंजिक स्थला had actually complained and he got a shrap from Brahmadev saying that if now you don't stop this, your head will split. That is how the story comes to us. That's why he's concerned. He's like, Baba, हमारे पापों का घड़ा भर गया है. That is why he's waiting for Sita. And he says this. This is not he says this when one of his ministers, Mahaparshva, is like, what are you waiting for? Go. You don't need her permission. You go have fun. Like dogs have fun. You go have fun. You don't need anybody to tell you ki acha haan, and then you do it, right? And he says, no, Baba, I am a little scared. And this is the reason, because there is some shrap which I'm scared of. That is why he does not force himself on Sita. It is not out of any consent. So the way, as I said before, what Mandodari said, that your senses have led to your downfall. You giving into them have led to your downfall. And she says, it's strange because I actually am better than Sita in every way. And still you couldn't see me and you went after her. She basically ended up being your nemesis.
All right. So now, before I start taking questions, because काफी आ चुके हैं, एक last मेरे को discussion करना है. This is more technical and theoretical, which I wanted to talk to you from a historical perspective, is the authenticity of the Uttarakandam. Right now, we have to discuss this. Naito, I think it's unfair on the viewers and listeners of the podcast also. Now, I'll be very clear. In my reading of the Ramayana, I'm putting my view up front so that people don't and people who have gone through the Ramayana series know this for a fact that I am very clear. It seems as if Uttarkand is a later addition to the Ramayana. And I'm putting it. Does that
Yeah.
mean it should not be part of the Ramayana? I'm not saying that. I'm just saying it's quite clear. It looks like a later addition into the Ramayana because in terms of the subtle moral changes also in the Uttarkandam, it is far more problematic in my view in certain areas than the rest of the Ramayana. You have a clear moral arc in the main Ramayana, and then the Uttarkandam comes and something changes, and some changes are good, some changes in my view are bad, but I think it is very important because you do talk about it. Like, I'll read your quote from the book. You say scholars of the Ramayana are split over the question of the authenticity of Uttarakanda. There are very pertinent arguments both in favor and against. While the verdict is yet to be pronounced, both the Baroda Critical Edition and the Grita Press edition of Valmiki Ramayana have Uttarkanda included in them. Even the Bibek Dev Roy edition has. Hence, for this book, I have taken interesting stories from Uttarkanda as relevant and mentioned them in the notes. And the two controversial events, I have added them separately in the epilogue. Now, why did you decide to do that?
Yeah. So, to be very honest, for the sake of consistency, yeah, I wanted to ensure that I'm honest to the work that I do. Because if I say Uttarakhand nahi hai, then a lot of other interesting stories which sort of fill the gap. And actually, a lot of people say that whole filling gap itself shows that it could have been a later day interpolation. Yeah, fair enough. What I'm saying is, if I use a source text and if I'm saying that this source text is what I considered as my reference text, then I don't really have the adhikar or the qualification to say ye hai ye nahi hai. Although in some sense, if I was forced to pronounce, it does feel like Uttarakhand is a later day edition, no doubt about it. I wouldn't say no doubt about it, but yeah, I would be more inclined towards it. But then when I take certain stories from Uttarakhand, yeah, especially a lot of stories around the birds, the lineages of especially Ravan, the stories around his abduction of women and stuff, right? Lot of those, even this whole Ravan Bhakti thing, the whole Ko Shankar, his whole Shiva Bhakti thing, the stories which I've added, they come from Uttarakhand. Now, if I say I'll take part of Uttarakhand which suits me, but part of Uttarakhand which does not suit me, I will say no to it, right? And I might still say no to it when largely foreign authors and everybody they write about these episodes. They do write about those episodes. So I did not want to not include them, but I wanted to give the readers that choice to say मानना है कि नहीं मानना है. ये पहली बात आप पर है. But I also wanted to make a second point. While I don't know whether these events exactly happened as they were, I have a view on reading those two incidents in a certain way. And I don't see it necessarily as right or wrong, and not necessarily with the angle that is typically communicated. Yeah. Be it Shambhu Khwada, be it the giving up of Sita. Especially the giving up of Sita part, I see it as a major Dharma Sankat. Major Dharma Sankat for a person who is at the level of the Raja, and that position of Raja in those days was different from the position of Raja now, right? Raja was considered to be a Devta. His word is Nyay. So if you are at that position, your accountability to the society is even more. You have to be above suspicion. Not just you, your family, your wife, everybody has to be above suspicion. Which means there may be a situation where your Pati Dharma and your Raj Dharma might come in complete conflict, and you might be faced with a situation where none of the options available to you are really optimal, and you still have to make that call. How do you make that call? is the question Ram is faced with in that situation. And he took a certain stand which he thought might be for the greater good. We may agree or not agree with him. But that was a real situation, a dharma sankat situation. And we all may be faced with it, and maybe there is a way for us to learn from that incident in our own lives, right? That if we are faced with this situation, what do we do? In a way, it is not very different from what Arjun was faced with. To kill your family members or to live your Kshatriya dharma, because in a way it was a fight for dharma, right? It was a fight against injustice. What do you do at that point? Killing your family, it is not the greatest good out there in a way, right? Your entire family is destroyed. यार अपने सारे बच्चे उनके मर गए उसमें. So it was also a suboptimal choice. But you have to make that choice at some point in time. And unfortunately, this was the situation Ram was faced with. Somewhere I think Sita understood that. But yes, when it became too much, second time when she was asked, Ki bhai ab kya? And she said, Nahi. I have not hated you. I have been with you in all these decisions. I have also understood why you've taken those decisions. I have fulfilled my role at every point as your Sahadharmacharini, but not anymore. And I draw a line there. That is what she did. So for me, it is this, how do you say, some situations which you really don't have a way out of, and you have to continue to live, and you have to make that decision. So that is how I've tried to look at that incident. But as I said, because I have put in a lot of my own view there, I wanted to keep it separate to let people know very clearly what is from Ramayan and what is my own view.
Fair enough. I think that I think you've tried to be intellectually honest there, which is admirable. Like in my case, I clearly believe the Uttarakhand is a clear later interpolation. Whether it works in favor of the Ramayana, sometimes in some views, and sometimes, actually, more often than not, I think the more problematic verses in my analysis come out of there. Problematic in my view, but. I definitely feel it is a later addition to the Valmiki Ramayana. I believe the story suddenly changes, and there is a lot of post hoc rationalizing in the Uttar Ramayana, Uttarakandam. Like, there is, you clearly see, okay, ये यहाँ पे लिखा हुआ है, अभी इसकी जस्टिफिकेशन कैसे करें, तो हम यहाँ पे अपने तरीके से उसकी जस्टिफिकेशन कर रहे हैं. But I believe you've tried to take the much more intellectually honest and tough path. So kudos to you for that. मैं तो नहीं करता, मैं तो just उसको side में कर देता था और बोलता था interpolation. I don't touch it. Again, I'll give you an example. Even in the Rig Veda, right? There are even in the family books, there are certain verses that are considered to be letter interpolations, and this is a consensus across scholars of Indian origin and Western origin, in all Indologists. Like, Indologists have come up with this list which they call verses that are later interpolations in the Rig Veda also. I'm talking about the family books, not in the latter books, in the early books. So it is a very common thing that people do talk about it. But chalo, now enough of you and I talking. Now let us
I
take
just want to make
questions.
one point there, Kushal. What
Sure.
are the reason I also kept it is because I genuinely believe that there might be something for us to gain from those incidents also. They may or may not be true. But just given that situation, even if it was hypothetical, so to say, there is definitely something for us to learn and something for us to question and gain in our own life. So I found value in that, to be very honest. And people can take their call when they read it. So that's why I left it in there. I kept
Absolutely.
it in there,
Absolutely.
yeah, intentionally.
I 100%. I mean, imagine starting with this question. अभी मैं क्या करूं? But viewer has asked it, so I'm gonna ask you. Was Pushpak Viman a flying aircraft or a divine vehicle? If it was a flying vehicle, why no technical details are available in our text? यार, come on, यार. क्या
Yeah,
बोलूं?
I don't know. As I said, right, there are aspects which are metaphorical. Yeah, are they speaking of Pushpak Viman as something that flew? Yes, they are. So I don't have any more technical understanding of it than any of you.
Yeah. So,
Uh, yeah, that's where I would leave it.
yeah, my answer is simple. It is not real. Let's get real. I don't have any problems, and if somebody's sentiments are hurt, let them be hurt. I don't care. I mean, it's not real. Let's get real. If there is, show me the evidence. There is no evidence. There is no archaeological evidence.
There
There
is
is
no
zero evidence.
archaeological evidence, but does the text talk about it? Yes, it does. Now, was it
Yeah,
metaphorical? Was it not? I don't know. But the text does talk about it, but there are no technical details. There is no design. Nothing of that sort is given.
yeah. It is. It is an exaggeration. I am answering it. Okay. This question is good. How much time does Amiji usually dedicate to researching the topic, and at what point does she realize that the research is enough to complete the book?
How do I say this, right? It's because I was not, I am more of an accidental author. Let's put it that way. It was never a plan ki likhna hai. Things turned out in a certain way. However, I have been studying out of my interest for a long time. So I, like Kushal says, like we've known each other for a long time. लिखने का तो अभी हुआ. But these were the topics we have been talking about. Sanskrit was something of interest to me. I was learning it out of interest. Reading was out of interest. Mahabharata studying because I wanted to read the original. The questions were what I genuinely had, which you see in Ramayana and even Mahabharata, were the questions I had. So the whole study was to satisfy my curiosity, let's say. And that is how the writing happened. So do I have a perfect answer to answer this कि अच्छा मैंने ऐसे सोच के करा और structure करा? Actually I don't. I just felt after, so Mahabharata, I think we studied for a year and a half, over a year and a half, and after that I started writing also because I had time. Mahabharat was, I had been anyways reading it for like 2 3 years before I started writing it out of my curiosity.
All right. So the next question is, according to Nilesh Oak, Lanka described in the Valmiki Ramayana is different from the Lanka that exists today. What are your thoughts on that? I don't know.
Yeah,
What are your thoughts?
so I mean, as I said, in can we say this based on Ramayana per se? I don't know because that is not my study of interest. Do we? Does it talk about 100 yojan going straight? Yes, all that it does. Yeah, for sure. So yeah, I actually don't know. That is not my area of study at all.
Hmm. All right. So next question. Uh, ओके समबडी सेड इस पॉडकास्ट का हिंदी वर्जन करो प्लीज। अरे तेरी बात तो हुई है ना वाद पे हिंदी में, सो वहां पे हिंदी वर्जन हो गया, वो जाके देख लेना। हाँ। Okay, many people have tried to. This is an excellent question. Okay, and I want to spend some time on this one because this is something that is my area of interest also. Many people have tried to date the Mahabharata based on astronomical references and archaeological data. Other than Nilesh Nilkantork, is there any attempt to date the Ramayana? Is it even possible? First, you can answer. I can also give an answer on
I
this.
think a lot of people have tried to date Ramayan based on astronomical observations. But then again, I would let Kushal you take this because I don't have a very strong view on that. My interest is more from an Itihasic and a Shastric perspective on Ramayana. So you take this.
Yeah, so here's the point. As far as the date of the Ramayana is concerned, I think Pushkar Bhatnagar wrote that book, Dating the Era of Lord Rama, using the same methodology that Nilesh Nilkant Oak uses. For the record, I totally disagree with Nilesh Nilkant Oak's dates. Now, all the Nilesh Nilkant Oak fans in the live chat can start abusing me. 1, 2, 3, go. Okay, now that I have said that, I follow what BB Lal did. BB Lal's date of the Ramayana. BB Lal dated the Mahabharata. Now you can extrapolate the date of the Ramayana using BB Lal's work. As far as I'm concerned, the date of the Ramayana, Pushkar Bhatnagar's methodology, I don't agree. Wait, I will search the book right now. I apologize for doing um this search writing because I did not know that you were guys were gonna. Yeah, so it is a book by Pushkar Bhatnagar. It is available on Amazon. If you want to read, that astronomical data stuff, I don't buy that date personally, but it's a very interesting way of looking at the era. In fact, something Ami had written about this astronomical work and stuff like that in the Mahabharata book. I remember in the latter half of the book you have written it. So.
But that was
Uh,
mainly to say that there is work going on and there are astronomical references which are mentioned and there is work going on that. I hadn't put my foot down and said I hadn't said that this is the date or this is not the date. It was just to say there is work happening. That's it.
No, so if people, I'll just share the screen for the benefit of the viewers. मैं सिर्फ आप लोगों के लिए benefit के लिए कर रहा हूँ. So there is work done on this subject. ऐसा नहीं है कि नहीं किया गया. ये देखो Amazon का ये book है, Dating the Era of Lord Ram, और ये बहुत पुरानी book है. ये तो मैंने कितने साल पहले पढ़ी थी. I think I read this book in like 2010 or something. If I remember, मैंने 2010 या 11 में book पढ़ी थी. And that is one book that has worked on it. As far as I'm concerned, the best way to date the era of Ramayana would be like this: we date the Mahabharata using the tools provided to us now by Bibi Lal in his excavations. Then we work from that and we look at the Senoli excavations. Now, there is a robust debate happening within the Senoli excavations between the archaeological community, which some archaeologists say that we cannot push the date of the Mahabharata back. And some say we should push the date of the Mahabharata back, considering some of the artifacts that have been found in Senoli, and they look similar in terms of, corded ware, grey ware, wo sab jo baat karte hain uski. And from that, we can extrapolate certain things and work on the Ramayana. Now, the problem that comes in the dating of the Ramayana is there is an active group, albeit a minority, inside the Indology departments, aka Sheldon Pollock. But why I'm mentioning Sheldon Pollock is because he is the torchbearer and the chief translationist of the Murthy library. So to say that we don't take him seriously is a straw man. If you ask me, here is an Indian billionaire who is giving, tons of money to Sheldon Pollock to basically translate Indian epics. And they are there in every major library in India. Murthy library books are there available. Although the Ramayana is usually considered to be like 1500 to 2000 years before the Mahabharata. Interestingly, a person I have deep respect for, in fact, I use his translations also, Bibek Dev Royji. Even him in his book, in the introduction on the Ramayana, is, he's like, I'm not sure about the date of the Ramayana himself. I personally feel the story of the Ramayana happening before the Mahabharata. I mean, let us talk about that, is easily provable through mentions in both the epics, don't you think?
Yes, absolutely. As in, if somebody says that Ramayana happened after Mahabharata, I mean, people can go around doing a lot of things, but in general, I think it's very easy to derive, to come to the conclusion that Ramayana happened before because of multiple reasons. One, you find the mention of Ramayana in Mahabharata. You do not find any mention of Mahabharata in Ramayana. Yeah, you find some very old stories, but not really the Mahabharata Yuddha, nothing related to that. Others have developed by the time of Mahabharata is a lot more advanced than what you see in in Ramayana. So just based on the story and its context, or the whole thing around it, and the fact that you find a lot of mention of Ramayana in Mahabharata, I can very easily have that Shraddha that Ramayana happened before Mahabharata.
All right, fair enough. I think that's a fair enough answer. Now, a lot of people got angry about me talking about the Pushpak Vimana being not real. I mean, I don't know what to do, but I will request you to go and check the facts of this article. This was written in 2015. IISc research debunked long ago myth of ancient Indian flying. I want you guys to have an open mind. I want you guys to go and read about it. See, getting mad at me, getting angry at me is not going to change this. We have beautiful things in our scriptures that are there. We don't need these things to just make these points. You just weaken the case of people like me, at least. I mean, that's all I'm saying. Anyways, so okay, this question, Ami, because you deal with it in the, I think in the book also. So मैं पूछ रहा हूँ तुझे, what's your view on Shambhu ka Vadha? Is it justified?
So Shambhu Ka Vadha is an interesting episode, right? General understanding of Shambhu Ka Vadha is that he was killed only and only because he was a Shudra and there was no other reason for his death. And that he was killed because he was doing tapasya. Now, there, if we want to label a society based on this one incident, we must find other precedences, right? Pehle to let's understand what this episode itself was. It is said that there was a kid who died in Ram's Rajya, and Ram's Rajya was such that nobody died before their age. So there is a kid who died, and the father comes and he's like, something is wrong in this kingdom. Because if nothing was wrong, if everything was running the way it was, if everything was running in accordance with the law of nature, this wouldn't have happened. So Ram goes and sees what is going on, and he sees that there is this one guy जो ऐसे उल्टे लटके हैं, उल्टे लटक कर he is doing some very very ugra tapasya. So he goes to him and he says that, "Arey, what are you doing?" So this guy, "Who are you? Who are you? And what are you doing?" So the man says, "I am Shambhuk from the Shudra community, and I am doing this ugra tapasya because I want to win over the heavens. मुझे इंद्रलोक को जीतना है. I want to win over that, and I want to go to Swarga with this body." Okay, and hence I am doing this tapasya. And then what happens as a consequence? Ram takes his talwar and cuts his. I am so sorry, really sorry for this.
Yeah, it's okay. Repeat your answer again.
So where कहाँ तक थी मैं, कहाँ तक सुना तुमने?
Start from this beginning again because it's all gone.
Oh, okay, okay.
The last 1 minute or so. Last 1 minute or so.
ठीक है. So basically, where this kid dies before age in Ram's Rajya, and the father says that something is wrong, something is not in accordance with the natural laws, and hence you need to figure out कि कहाँ पे अधर्म हो रहा है. तो राम जाते हैं देखने, एंड ही सीज दैट एक बंदा है वो उल्टा लटका हुआ है, उल्टा लटक के कुछ तो बहुत उग्र तपस्या कर रहा है. तो ही गोज टू दैट पर्सन एंड सेज, हु आर यू एंड व्हाट आर यू डूइंग, आप क्या कर रहे हो? तो द गाय सेज, आई एम शंभूक, आई एम अ शूद्र, and I am doing this ugra tapasya because I want to go to the heaven with this body, and I want to basically win over the Swargalok. So Ram takes his sword and cuts his neck off and basically kills Shambhu, and the kid comes to life again. And then the reason generally understood is that because he was a Shudra, he couldn't do tapasya, and hence he had to be killed. And then there is this whole thing that अच्छा त्रेता युग में शूद्र तपस्या नहीं कर सकते, कलयुग में कर सकते हैं, so it's fine. Okay, and then this whole thing became about caste. So my thing is that if this had happened, right, there should have been multiple instances before also. Or rather, my question was, did it happen before? Were there other, two questions, other Shudras who are shown to do tapasya and were also killed or not killed? Because if there are other Shudras who are doing tapasya and they are allowed to live, then clearly this incident couldn't have been just about caste. One. Second, is there a precedence that somebody wanted to go to Swarga with the body and he was not allowed to, whatever be that stature? Now, interestingly, in the main part of Mahabharata, you have instances of both. So Shravan Kumar is actually a son of a Vaishya father and a Shudra mother. Okay, he is also in that sense not a Brahmin, and he's shown to do tapasya. He's in fact called a tapasvi. He's called a muni, right? And nobody tries to kill him only because he's trying to do tapasya. Shabri, of course, it's not very clear what exactly her jati is there, and this whole Bed Khane Wala episode is not there. But she's also serving a rishi called Matanga, and she's also called a tapasvini. Okay, so clearly, ऐसा नहीं था कि तपस्या as a whole was shunned for a community in the time of Ram. नहीं तो इनको भी नहीं करने देते. Then this Shambhuk thing doesn't make sense, and that is why when people say Uttarkand में inconsistency है, तो definitely inconsistency है, because नहीं तो पहले भी होता, ठीक है, if it was all about just caste. But then let's assume this happened. Then could there have been another reason for it? And then there is another story of Trishanku, which comes also in the main part of Ramayana. Trishanku was a king. He's actually one of the four fathers of Ram. Like Shri Ram के lineage में वो आते हैं. And he wanted to get to Swarga with the body. ठीक है, तो वो अपने गुरु है वशिष्ठ, उनके पास जाते हैं एंड ही सेज यू कंडक्ट अ यज्ञ. नाउ ही इज नॉट डूइंग तपस्या, ही इज अ राजा, राइट? तो ही सेड आप यज्ञ करो और मुझे स्वर्ग भेज दो इसी शरीर में. एंड वशिष्ठ सेज ऐसा हो ही नहीं सकता, दिस इज अगेंस्ट द लॉज ऑफ नेचर. तो ऐसा तुम एक्सपेक्ट भी मत करो कि सशरीर तुम स्वर्ग जा सकते हो, दैट कैन नॉट हैपन. So Trishanku is very upset and he goes to the sons of Vashisht and he says, no, you must do this for me. I'm the king. You must do this tapasya for me. You must do this yagna for me. And the sons say कि नहीं ऐसा नहीं कर सकता, आप जाओ यहाँ से, मेरे पिताजी ने आपको मना किया है, फिर भी आप ऐसे कर रहे हो. And they actually cursed Trishanku. Now there is this ongoing tussle, enmity between Vashisht and Vishwamitra at that time, because Vishwamitra has not yet become Vishwamitra. This is before his time of Vishwamitra, when he was a rishi called Kaushik, when he was a Raja called Kaushik, and he wanted to gain Brahma Balam to equal Vashishta. So there is this ongoing thing there. So he had become partly Siddha but partly not. He was doing tapasya at that time. So Trishanku goes to him, and because now Vishwamitra wants to prove that I can do whatever Vashish does, Rishi Vashish does. So then he says, "ठीक है, I will send you to Swarga." Okay. So he does some tapasya and sends Trishanku to Swarga, but Indra pushes him back. So he falls back, and then there is a story that acha, fir bhi Vishwamitra created some artificial Swarga and sent him there, right? So now the point is, this thing about going to Swarga with Sharir was not even allowed to Trishanku, who was a king. So clearly that expectation itself was against the law of nature. And when we talk about Ram Rajya, the description of Ram Rajya is like a perfect place where everything is in accordance with the law of nature. Now, when we see it with this aspect, Shambhu Kvad then makes sense, because then clearly there was an issue there, right? If the dead person is waking up or whatever, he was unconscious or whatever, so there is a direct connection established at that point, that whatever Shambhu was doing was actually leading to the death of another person. Now, let's take another question. That was identity the only concern? If Shambhu was not a Shudra, if he was, say, a Brahmin, and if as a Brahmin he had done something which led to the death of some other person, would Ram have taken action or not? Then that is also another question to ask, if this was all about only identity, right? Now, let's go back again. Ravan himself is a Brahmin. He is the son of Vishwashrava and the grandson of Pulatsya, Rishi Pulatsya. So he was also a Brahmin, and Ram did kill him as well, just because he was an adharmi, right? So there could be multiple ways of looking at the Shambhuk incident as well. As I said, right, I have put this story in the epilogue because I wanted to bring out some of these aspects. These connections are not directly made in Ramayana. They are not. In Uttarkand, it is pretty much just said that he's a Shudra, so that I'm a Shudra and I wanted to go to Swarga in this body. Ram kills him and the sun is away. So I told you both sides now. One, what the incident actually happened, and the other incidents which could be connected to this, to say that it doesn't necessarily have to be about an identity, but about the action per se, which had a consequence. So this is how I have looked at it. But I must say, this is how I have looked at it.
Well, my answer is very simple. The defense of the Mahabharata cannot be taken, because if the Mahabharata is later, then you cannot extrapolate what the Ramayana was thinking based on what the Mahabharata was thinking. Because there are from a
No, but
different era altogether.
Mahabharata कहाँ से आया? Trishanku is in Ramayana.
I understand the Trishanku argument, but no, you use the Mahabharata also as an example of, certain places Mahabharata says this, Mahabharata says that.
No. I'm talking only Ramayana now. Sorry. जो भी मैंने अभी बोला, that is purely from Ramayana, not taking. So this whole Shravan incident is is Ramayana.
That
This
I
whole
understand, but
Shambhu
I'm
thing
just
is
talking about
Ramayana.
that yeah, I understand that. I'm just talking about the argument you made in the beginning about the Mahabharata. That I think is problematic from a logical perspective, because I will not use a latter text to defend
No,
a
I
former
didn't understand.
text.
महाभारत का कहाँ मैंने references में use किया?
You literally use the word Mahabharata, or I may have misheard you. You
No,
said
so if I
Mahabharata.
have used the word Mahabharat, I said it by mistake.
Okay,
All the
fair
things
enough.
which I have said is from Ramayana only. So
Okay.
all the examples that I gave are all रामायण एक्चुअली मैं ये रामायण महाभारत बहुत बोलती हूँ ना, तो वो कई बार कंफ्यूज हो जाता है. तो अभी के कॉन्टेक्स्ट में इन जम्बू whether there is no महाभारत reference at all. Just to clarify, if I've said it, I'm sorry. This is all from within Ramayana.
Okay. Yes, see, my answer is very simple. It's a problematic story. It can be rejected. Why do mental gymnastics around it? I don't agree with that story. I don't agree with the final conclusion. I don't agree with the action. End of story. It's such a
So you don't
simple
agree.
answer.
So, Kushal, you are right. If you just say you don't agree, right? But to use this and say that, oh, everything was casteist is where I have an issue. Because to prove it was casteist, you need to have more precedences or examples of that. One incident cannot be used to brand a story or a person, right? To call Ram casteist, ये एक use कर दिया तो नहीं हो सकता. So if we assume that this is true, then there are other connections to be made to say this need not necessarily be only about identity.
Eh,
That's my small point here.
yeah, but if it is not just about identity A, it could be about identity Y. That is fine. Just because it is about X, Y, and Z doesn't mean it is also not about X. First point number one. So it's never, if it is, if there are more variables, if that is the argument, one of the variables is also that has
Correct,
been
but that's why I said. So the question is, have there been other exes which have been killed for doing the?
I'm sorry, guys. Her internet is acting up. I can't do anything about it. Yeah,
I am so sorry. This is just crazy
it's
today.
okay. It's okay. I'm used to it now. I'll edit all these portions out. I have no option. चलो अभी मैं next question लेता हूँ. Are there any foreign historical religious authors' works that influence Ami ji's writing?
I try not to use. In fact, I don't even refer to the English translations because I think it impacts the language. So I go with the traditional text. So typically it's Gita Press, but for Mahabharata I had used the Bori Critical Edition. For Ramayana, it is pretty much been the Gita Press.
Okay. Now, Buddha has been mentioned in the Valmiki Ramayana. Does that help timing the Ramayana? This is
Buddha
a
has
question.
not been mentioned. Okay, so I know why this is
Exactly.
coming.
That's what I wanted to say. Where has he been mentioned? कहाँ mention किया है?
No,
मैंने
he
तो
is
पूरा पढ़ा
mentioned
है.
because there is a word called Buddha. Okay.
Yeah.
Now
That's not the Buddha.
we we call Pandit Nehru.
Yeah.
Okay. So now if we see the word Pandit in the other text, clearly the word Pandit exists in the other text, right? Does it mean they're talking about Pandit Nehru? No. Buddha just means a wise person. So when word Buddha is come, Gautam Buddha got that name because he was wise. That doesn't mean Buddha as a word was never used before Gautam Buddha. So the word Buddha is not used for Buddhists in Mahabharata. It is just used for wise people. That's it.
Yeah. This is the problem when we have these kinds of strawman arguments. It's just Arya, like the word Arya. So I'll tell you what has happened recently. I tweeted this out also. I'm just using this as an analogy again. So we just finished, we wrapped up our Rigveda discussion, and in the Rigveda discussion, there was this very interesting verse, which is uh, uh, why I'm using the word Arya as an example is to actually bolster your point on Buddha. So the verse is कहाँ गया यार मेरे को 633 था शायद मगर फिर भी मुझे डबली कंफर्म करना है इसके लिए मैं चेक कर रहा हूँ कहाँ गया यार I think it was 633.3. Let me check. एक minute. So the verse is very interesting, and I'll tell you why it is very interesting. Because the people who, at times make these brandishing claims about many things. Yeah, it's 633.3. And let me open the Rigveda that I have over here, and I'll just read the verse out and see how fascinating this verse is and how many problems it creates for people who make the claim of a Aryan migration or an Aryan invasion, right? Now, what is a classic trope that is given every time? That The dasas and dasyus are the natives, and they come in, and they were like, attacked, blah blah blah. And by the way, the tone and tenor of Griffith, Wilson, Stephanie Brereton, all the same, no variation in three translations. So I'm just using one to read, but three say the same thing. So one of the things that the verse says is very interesting. The verse says, "You, O champion, smite both kinds of enemies, the dasa and the Arya obstacles, like trees with hatchets, with your well placed cloaks, break them apart in the battles, O most manly of men." Now, what does this basic verse say? You're going to smite both kinds of enemies. The Dasas are also the enemies, the Aryas are also the enemies. What is the popular poppycock that has been sold? These Aryas came in, the Dasas and the Dasyus are natives, and they kind of have this fight. These Aryas win over the Dasas and the Dasyus. But now somebody, so I thought about it, what could be the possible argument somebody might come back. So one of the arguments somebody might come back, and by the way, this is from the sixth book, and I am reading the Rig Veda from a Talagirian worldview, where even the internal chronology of the Rig Veda is, I am assuming sixth is the number one book, the first ever book of the Rig Veda inside the family books. So imagine this is written in the family books in the first book, this verse. Now, somebody might come and say there are quantitatively more verses that talk about fighting the Dasas and the Dasyus. Point taken. But there are 2, 3 occasions when they talk about in the sixth. I'm not talking about seven or others. I'm just talking about number six. They talk about fighting Aryas also. So, what is the most likely conclusion that an open minded person who does not care if Aryan invasion is true or not should take based on the Rig Veda? That the Arya word basically sometimes might connote a tribal identity. That, like even Talagiri says, yes, it sometimes does connote a tribal, but by and large, it basically means a noble person, or a person depicting certain qualities. Why I'm using this as an example is to bolster your Buddha point. That
So
it is
actually,
based.
not just the Buddha point, Kushal. I talk about the Arya and Arya specifically for in the Ramayana context, because a lot of people have said that the Ramayana actually is a Aryan Ram killing the Dravidian Rakshas, Dravidian Ravan. So they've given a racial conflict to that as well. Now, it's very interesting. In Ramayana, Arya. Ravan is called Arya by Mandodari and his other wives. Ram, of course, is Arya. Sugriv and Vali are called Arya by their wives. Yeah. Similarly, Kaika is called Anarya for whatever her action is. So everybody is called Arya and Anarya based on what their action is. Now it is possible that, as you said, it could have meant as a tribal racial gay as well. But then it means everybody was basically then Arya only, right? Be it Ravan or be it Sugriv or be it Hanuman or be it Shri Ramji, however. So even within the way Arya is used within Ramayana, it does not anyway show that it was an Aryan versus a Dravidian conflict of Ram and Ravan just because it's Aryan Dravidian. So, so it actually proves that point as well. So I'm glad you brought it up.
Yeah, no. In fact, 633.3 is the biggest problem to solve for Aryan invasion and Aryan migration apologists. It is a big problem to solve. Like if you look at it from a Talagirian perspective, where Talagiri clearly says this is just book of the Rig Veda is nothing but the book of the Purus. And if you look at it from the book of the Purus perspective, now it is so natural what the Purus are writing about. Sometimes the Purus have problems with certain tribes which they call Arya. Sometimes the Purus have problems with certain tribes that they call Dasa or Dasyu. It is literally a book of tribal conflict. Anybody who reads the Rig Veda with an unbiased, open mind will come up with the conclusion that Talagiri comes with. Are everything that Shrikant Talagiri sir says absolutely 100% right? I don't know, right? I'm not that advanced in my research as Shrikant Talagiri is. But whatever I have read in my life, how many people who have made the claim about this, and as a humble student who actually reads scriptures for now more than a decade plus, I can tell you the Talagiri lens is the most sensible lens I have come across, especially in looking at this whole Arya Dasa Dasyu conflict. I mean, when I was having this discussion this very Sunday on 6:33 with some of us were having this discussion, I had to tweet it out. I just mentioned this 6:33 is fascinating. I did not want to go anywhere because I was waiting to come on the
That's good.
podcast. That's all. Now you go read 6:33 and tell me how do you justify an Aryan invasion after that? Because this is the family books.
Hmm.
The Aryas are fighting Aryas also. Are you trying to tell me that? So please decide kar lo kis side pe ho. Now it still does not mean that I am convinced about the Indian homeland. That is a separate issue. But I definitely am not convinced about the South Russian homeland on this. Now let me ask you, because I want to see if there is any other question left. I just want to be absolutely doubly sure I have not missed any question. No, it seems we've taken all the questions. तो ठीक है चल मैं एक तेरे को last question तेरे को पूछ लेता हूँ before
Hmm.
going. So what is going to be the next book? क्या लिखने वाली है?
पता नहीं यार, अभी लिखना शुरू नहीं किया है, दो तीन टॉपिक्स हैं माइंड में. लेट्स सी, आई विल टेल यू व्हेन आई when something gets crystallized. अभी कुछ नहीं है.
Ami Ganatra holding her cards close.
But I hope something comes, but no, nothing yet.
Yeah. Well, and also just one thing about the Buddha Rama dialogue. Even Griffith considers it to be a later interpolation. Just FII humans. Even an Indologist considers it to be a later interpolation. And thanks to my moderator who has sent me an urgent email, he's like, Bhaiya, ye dikha do. And I agree with you. तूने अच्छा काम किया है.
क्या?
So yeah. So this is, so they are using this as the translation. So yeah. So this is the translation. We rank the Buddhist with the thief and all the impious crew who share this sinful disbelief. ये basically उसकी बात कर रहे हैं. Now, basically, even the interpolation bit. Abhi yaar, if you are going to use the Indologists as your proof, then at least have the courtesy to read this. The dialogue between Rama and Jabali is finished in the first sloka, in which Rama is not depicted as annoyed. In his translation, Griffith calls these lines manifestly spurious and cautions that these need to be regarded with suspicion. There you go. Like I said, I'm not even going to use Griffith as my defense. I am going to use um, the logic that I use to explain the Rama angle from the Arya and Arya kind of angle. That a lot of times the words that are used and the context in which the words are used are very different. And please be very careful when you study Indian scriptures, which is why I always say read multiple translations, which is why even in the Ramayana, I have resorted to one Hindi translation, which is the Gita Press Gorakhpur, one English translation, even when I'm doing my sessions, is the Bibek Dev Roy translation. And you can also use a Western Indologist translation. There is nothing wrong in it. In fact, if you read multiple translations, you learn more, you understand better, and you gain more. So I'll leave it at that. And Ami, as far as you are concerned, I'm really happy that you've written now 2 books. मैं तो तेरे को हमेशा बोलता था लिखने को. तूने फाइनली मेरी बात मान ली कुछ सालों बाद. So good on you and congratulations and thanks for coming.
Thank you so much.
All right, guys. So in the description of the podcast, I have left the link of Ami's Twitter handle. Go follow her on Twitter. Please troll her. मजा आएगा. मैं भी थोड़ा हंसूंगा पीछे से इसके साथ. बाद में also please go and buy the book. First of all, if you have not even bought the Mahabharata Unravelled book, वो भी जाके खरीदो. And buy the Ramayana Unravelled book. Ami is a beautiful author. She writes very well. I wish I could write as well as her, but she has better skills when it comes to the writing department. At least I wish I had half her ability to write. She also has an amazing blog spot, by the way. I have left the link to her blog spot too, so go and check her blog spot out too. As far as I'm concerned, you guys know the drill. Please subscribe to the Cārvāka podcast YouTube channel. Please like this video. Please leave your comments in the in the comment section. And if you want to support the Charvak podcast, you know the drill. You can become a member on YouTube or on Patreon, or you can buy the merch on kushalmehra.com or on Kadak merch, or you can send your donations through UPI. I'll see you guys next time. Until then, take care. Bye bye.